Please subscribe, it helps a lot.
When the porch light flickered on again at the old Shaw house, it wasn't the light itself that caught my attention. It was what the light meant. The house had sat dark for more than 2 years, its windows dead-eyed and curtains drawn, a skeleton of weatherboard and empty rooms. But now it glowed faintly against the low clouds, the way it had when I was a boy sneaking through the yard, daring my friends to knock on the door. I stood at the edge of the beach where the sea met the street, salt in my mouth, watching the faint yellow bloom from the windows as though the house was breathing again. Wyman Shaw was back. Most people in Portarlington probably hadn't noticed. The days shortened over the bay and the footy on weekends kept everyone's heads busy. But I'd noticed, even before the light, there'd been a shift in the air, a tension I couldn't explain. And then that light. I remembered Wyman from when I was a kid. Tall, dark-haired, face so smooth and ageless he might have been painted. He was the neighbour we weren't supposed to talk about, the man who'd show up in late spring and leave when the nights grew shorter, the man who never seemed to eat, who nodded politely at my mother but never lingered. I used to sneak through the gaps in the back fence, peering into his garden, hoping for a glimpse of him moving behind the lace curtains. Sometimes, late at night, I'd see his shadow against the glass, still and watchful. Back then, I made a game of it. I dared the others. Bet you won't knock on his door. They'd chicken out. I never did. I'd creep up to the front porch, tap the knocker once, and run like hell, laughing into the night. I convinced myself he was a vampire, living off darkness and secrecy, and the thought thrilled me. But I wasn't a child anymore. I was 19 now, with arms ropey from hauling fishing nets and fingers rough with splinters from odd jobs around town. I'd grown into my height, but whenever I thought about Wyman, something in me turned back into that kid daring the shadows. I wanted to believe I wasn't afraid of him. The wind rolled in from the bay, sharp with seaweed and salt. I pulled my jacket tighter and crossed the road, moving closer to the house. The garden was overgrown, the grass thick and tangled. But it was the same house. The cracked steps, the fading paint, the iron knocker shaped like a lion's head. Nothing had changed except for the light and Wyman. I hesitated by the gate, fingers tracing the rusting latch. The light above the porch hummed faintly, casting a glow that barely reached the yard. I thought about calling out, pretending I was looking for work, an excuse to see him. But I didn't. I stood there and listened to the sea behind me and the soft creak of the house settling into itself. When Wyman appeared in the doorway, I forgot how to breathe. He looked the same. His dark hair, cut neat around his perfect head. His eyes, like polished stone, almost colourless in the porch light. His hands rested lightly on the frame of the door. I don't know if he saw me right away. I couldn't tell. For a moment, he stood there, looking out into the street, into the deepening dusk. The sky hung low, heavy with grey, the first hints of evening coming on. And then his gaze shifted, and I felt it land on me. I couldn't move. My body ached with the need to step forward, to say something, but the weight of his eyes held me still. He tilted his head, the smallest motion, like he was measuring the years between us, the difference between the boy who used to leave handprints on his windows and the man standing by the gate. The porch light flickered again, and he turned away, disappearing back into the house. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the light to glow against the falling dark. I stayed there long after the wind picked up, staring at the house, listening to the waves against the sand, wondering if I'd imagined the way he'd looked at me. But I knew I hadn't, not this time. I started picking up more jobs near Wyman's place, though it wasn't a choice that made sense. There were gutters that needed clearing a few streets down, a fence mending job 2 houses over, a patch of turf to reseed not far from the beach. I told myself I needed the money. That was only partly true. I kept an eye on the old Shaw house as I worked, watching from the corners of my vision while I hammered and dug and painted. The porch light clicked on at the same hour each evening, right before dusk. Curtains pulled tight against the daylight, but a glow from within hinted at life. I caught flashes of Wyman's silhouette through the slats. No one else in town seemed to notice, or they noticed and pretended not to. I couldn't tell which was worse. I saw no cars parked in the drive, no mail at the box, no deliveries. Wyman didn't shop at the market, didn't walk down to the pub, didn't greet the neighbors. During the day, the house sat as still as if no one lived there. Then the sun dipped behind the trees, the shadows stretched long across the lawn, and the light came on. Always at the same hour. One evening, I caught sight of him as I loaded a bag of garden waste into the back of my car. He stood on the veranda, leaning against the railing with his arms folded. His gaze swept across the street, resting on me for a beat longer than it should have. I raised a hand in a lazy sort of wave, and he gave the faintest nod, nothing more. I tried to pretend it didn't send a shiver through me, though it wasn't fear exactly. The next time I saw him, I made it a point to cross the street. I said I was looking for more work. His mouth tightened, a flicker of annoyance behind his eyes, but he said he didn't need anything. His voice was flat, clipped. He didn't invite me closer. "You never leave the house," I said, though I wasn't sure why I said it. Maybe I wanted to hear him deny it. Maybe I wanted to see him react. He stared at me, unreadable. "Some people prefer their own company." "Or they're hiding something," I said, with a half grin I hoped would look teasing. He took a step back, the shadows catching his face, turning it half into darkness. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe I do." I shrugged, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I'm not a kid anymore." His lips parted, as if he might say something, but instead, he closed them, gave a short shake of his head, and turned inside. The door shut softly behind him. I stood there for a while, listening to the soft creak of the house settling, the distant wash of the tide. The street was empty, except for me, and the quiet echo of what I'd said. Later that night, I mentioned Wyman to a couple of mates at the pub. One of them, Mick, who liked to talk big but spooked easy, leaned in close and said, "You know he's not right, don't you? That house has been off for years. My uncle reckons Wyman never sets foot outside during the day. They say he's not natural. My nan said the last person who got too nosy about him disappeared." I rolled my eyes, though I felt my skin tighten. "You believe everything your nan says?" "She's seen things," Mick said, his voice dropping low. "Better people than you have kept their distance. Don't say I didn't warn you." I didn't sleep well after that. I kept turning the words over in my mind, hearing the faint echo of Wyman's voice. "You don't know what you're talking about." But I wanted to know. I wanted him to see me, to notice the difference between the boy who used to knock on his door and the man standing there now. Maybe it was foolish, but I couldn't let it go. So I kept taking jobs near his place. I waved at him from across the street. I lingered longer than I should when he stepped outside for the briefest glimpses of night. He never smiled, never invited me closer. But he didn't tell me to leave either. And that silence, between his cold politeness and the shadows behind his windows, only fed the hunger gnawing at me. I wasn't looking for him that night. At least, that's what I told myself. I'd been walking home. The air was heavy with salt and mist, my shoes crunching along the gravel shoulder of the road. The moon hung low over the bay, cloud-slashed and dim. I thought I'd cut through the back lane to the house, shave off a few minutes from the walk. That was when I saw him. Wyman, out past the fences, where the old garden ran wild, nearly to the trees at the back of his lot. He moved like he was part of the night itself, shadows pooling at his feet. At first, I couldn't tell what he was carrying. A crate, maybe, or something bulkier. But as I drew closer, as the moonlight struck the edges of the form slung over his shoulder, my breath snagged in my throat. It wasn't a crate. It looked like a body. I didn't think. I called out, my voice sharp against the hush of the bay air. "Wyman!" He froze. For a split second, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then he turned, and before I could register the shift, he was there, right there, in front of me, his hand pressed hard against my chest, shoving me back against the fence. The wood groaned under the sudden weight. "Jack," he said, voice low, rough. His breath was cool against my skin, not with the heat of exertion, but with something older, colder. His face was close enough that I could see the flicker of something not quite human in his eyes. His teeth, when he bared them, were sharper than they should be, white and gleaming, with a faint, predatory curve to the canines. My heart thundered in my chest, a mix of fear and something sharper, something electric. I couldn't look away. His strength pinned me there without any effort. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said, voice tight with frustration. "This isn't something you can play with." I felt the wild panic rising, but underneath it was something else. A dark thrill. A rush of wanting to be seen, to be acknowledged. His grip was unyielding, his presence pressing against me like a weight. For the first time, he wasn't seeing me as the boy who used to dare him with childish games. He was seeing me. "Then show me what it is," I said, my voice a breath against the wind. My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears, but I forced the words out, my throat tight. "I'm not afraid." For a moment, the pressure of his hand against my chest deepened, as though he might crush the breath from me. His mouth tightened, and a sound escaped him, half a growl, half a curse. The hunger in his eyes was unmistakable now, but so was the hesitation. Abruptly, he let go. The sudden release made me stumble, my back scraping against the fence. I caught myself, breath ragged, every nerve in my body alight. Wyman stepped back, the shadows swallowing him up again, the weight of his presence retreating like a wave pulling back from the shore. "Go home, Jack," he said. His voice was raw now, a thin crack in the smooth surface I'd always imagined. Go home and stay away from me. I wanted to argue, to press closer, to make him tell me what he was carrying and why he was out in the dark. But the look in his eyes pinned me harder than his hand ever could. It wasn't just anger. It was warning. It was fear. It was something old and deep and dangerous. I turned and walked away, every step echoing louder than the last. The cold settled into my skin, but my blood burned hot, my heart thrumming wild with questions. I didn't look back, though I felt his eyes on me until I rounded the corner. By the time I reached the gate of my house, the night was silent again. But I knew silence could lie. And I knew Wyman wasn't gone. Not really. The next night, I went back. I told myself it was curiosity, or maybe defiance. But it wasn't. It was need, and a recklessness I couldn't talk myself out of. I waited until long after the street lamps flicked on, until the last sounds of laughter and conversation faded from the pub down the road, until the town settled into the uneasy quiet of midnight. Then I crossed the lane and slipped into the yard behind Wyman's house. The grass was long, wet with dew. The shadows stretched deep and tangled across the ground. I pressed close to the fence, listening for any sign of him. I wanted him to catch me. I wanted him to look at me the way he had last night. I wanted to see the crack in his mask again. The light in his window glowed faintly, a pale square against the dark. Then it snapped out. For a moment, I thought I'd missed my chance. But then, from deeper in the yard, came a soft rustle. I crept forward, barely breathing, until I saw him. He stood beneath one of the old twisted trees, his back to me. His hands were red, stained dark, slick and glinting in the thin moonlight. His head was bent low, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. The air around him felt different, denser, heavier. His stillness wasn't human. It was the stillness of a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. When he turned, his face caught the light. His eyes gleamed an unnatural red, and his mouth, Christ, his mouth, was streaked with blood. There was no longer any room for pretending. Wyman Shaw wasn't a man who kept to himself. He wasn't a man at all. My breath caught, loud in the quiet. His head snapped up. He crossed the space between us before I could move, faster than anything I'd ever seen. One moment he was at the tree, the next he was right in front of me, his hand gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. He didn't slam me into the fence this time. He didn't need to. His presence was a weight all its own, pressing me into the earth, into the dark, into the truth. "You think you're grown, Jack?" His voice was sharp now, cutting through the air like a blade. His breath was cool against my skin, his mouth so close I could see the tremor in his jaw. "Do you even understand what you're asking for? I can't undo what I am. If you stay near me, I will ruin you." The words hit me harder than his grip, harder than the cold. I should have been afraid, should have been running. But the heat rising in my throat wasn't fear. It was something messier, tangled up in years of wanting and not knowing how to say it, in the ache of being seen at last. My voice shook, but I didn't look away. "Maybe I don't care," I said, low, raw. "Maybe I just want you to see me." For a heartbeat, the world stilled around us. His grip tightened, then slackened. His face twisted, his lips drawing back in something that wasn't quite a snarl and wasn't quite a plea. There was something fragile breaking through his usual control, something that shimmered just below the surface. "You don't understand," he whispered, so quietly it might have been a thought. "You can't." "Then help me understand," I said, my words scraping against the back of my throat. My heart hammered, but I didn't step back. "You've spent all this time pretending I'm a kid, but I'm not. I'm here. You see me now, don't you?" He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, the glow in them dimmed slightly. "I see you," he said. His voice cracked, almost imperceptibly. "That's the problem." For a second, I thought he might pull me closer, but then he released me, stepping back, the air between us snapping cold and empty. He turned, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, his shoulders stiff with something that looked almost like regret. "Go home, Jack," he said again, but this time his voice was tired. "If you stay, you'll get hurt." I watched him melt into the shadows, every instinct screaming for me to follow, to press him for more, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood there alone in the dark, listening to my own pulse echo in my ears, knowing I wasn't ready to leave, not really. But I also knew he was right. Whatever this was, it wasn't a game, and I wasn't sure if I was brave enough or foolish enough to find out where it led. The air smelled of iron, thick and metallic, the way blood does before it has a chance to cool. The moon sat high and bloated in the sky, throwing silver shadows across the yard. I didn't mean to be there. I'd walked past Wyman's place because I couldn't sleep, because the silence of my own room gnawed at me worse than any noise. I didn't expect to see him feeding. At first, I thought he was bending over something broken, maybe a hurt animal. But then I saw the limp figure, pale and slack, cradled like a doll in his arms. The sound, the wet, rhythmic pull of it, made my stomach turn. I should have backed away. I should have run. Instead, I froze. He turned his head, lips parted, the gleam of his teeth catching the light. Blood streaked his mouth, his chin, his hands. His eyes found mine, and for a split second, I thought he might pretend he wasn't doing this. But there was no mask to put on now. The predator stared back at me, bare and unapologetic. In a blink, he dropped the body, whether it was man or animal, I couldn't tell, and crossed the distance between us. His hand closed around my throat, not tight enough to cut off breath, but enough to make my pulse stumble. His lips curled back, exposing his fangs, and this time, the hunger wasn't muted by politeness or regret. His breath was sharp with blood, his grip trembling with restraint. "Jack," he rasped, voice rough as gravel, "you don't know what you're doing." I did know, and I didn't care. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't pull away. My voice shook, but I forced it out anyway. "If you're going to do it, do it. But don't pretend you don't care about me." For a breathless moment, the world held still. His fangs hovered near my skin, his lips brushing the curve of my neck. I felt the shudder in his body, the fight he waged between hunger and control. His breath hitched, his shoulders tightened. Then, with a snarl that sounded more wounded than angry, he shoved me back. I stumbled, knees buckling against the wet grass. He stood over me, shaking, wiping the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. The look he gave me wasn't one of disgust. It was despair, raw and unguarded. "You idiot," he said, his voice cracking like a splintered bone. "I can't protect you if you keep following me. I can't." His breath caught, his jaw tightening, as though he was forcing himself to say it. "I can't love you without destroying you." The words hit harder than any shove or threat. My chest ached with the weight of them, the sudden understanding that all my reckless bravery, my stubborn chasing after him, had been dragging him closer to a line he couldn't cross. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him he was wrong, but the truth sat heavy between us. He cared. And that care was exactly why he couldn't stay. His eyes flickered, shadows swallowing the red glow as he stepped back, fists clenched at his sides. His voice softened, almost breaking. "Go home, Jack, while you still can." I watched him retreat into the dark, his figure folding into the night as though he belonged to it, as though he'd never been part of my world at all. My chest heaved, my throat burned, but I didn't move. The taste of his words lingered, bitter and sweet, twisting in the space between what I wanted and what I could never have. I stayed there long after he disappeared, staring into the shadows, listening for footsteps that didn't come. The house sat empty again, its windows blank and black, the curtains heavy against the fading light. Wyman was gone. No one saw him leave. No one in town spoke of it, but I knew. I hadn't slept since that night. I kept expecting to hear his voice, low and sharp, warning me away. I kept expecting to see him waiting by the fence, lips curled into that careful smirk he wore when he was trying to scare me. But the smirk was gone, and so was he. I spent my days drifting between odd jobs, my hands clumsy, my mind elsewhere. I watched the skies darken, the long winter shadows stretch over the town, but they brought no sign of him. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. My friends stopped asking. They figured I was finally leaving the childish fascination behind, but they were wrong. It wasn't fascination anymore. It was grief. At night, I'd walk by his house, daring the quiet. The porch light stayed dark, the weeds reclaiming the path. The air around it felt hollow, like the echo of a breath long exhaled. I wanted to knock on the door, to yell at him, to demand he come back. But there was nothing left to knock for. I kept thinking of what he'd said. "I can't love you without destroying you." He hadn't said it like a threat or even a warning. He'd said it like an apology, like he'd already ruined something between us before it could begin. I couldn't stop replaying the way his voice had broken on those words. I couldn't stop feeling the press of his hands on my shoulders, not rough this time, but desperate, as though he were holding me together as much as he was holding himself back. Weeks passed. The winter bled into spring, and the nights grew shorter, the air warming with the smell of the bay and cut grass. But I still walked by his house, waiting for a light to flicker on, for a door to creak open. It didn't. I knew he would come back. Not tomorrow, not soon, but eventually. The house wouldn't go up for sale. There would be no for sale sign, no movers. He'd simply return, as if he'd never been gone. And when he did, I'd still be here. Older, maybe wiser, maybe not. But waiting. I sat on the seawall one evening, watching the sun smear pink and gold across the water. My friends called to me from the pub, waving me over, but I shook my head. The wind tugged at my sleeves, cool and clean. I closed my eyes and let it fill my lungs. It didn't carry his scent, but for a moment, it felt like it could. Wyman had tried to protect me, but he couldn't erase what was already carved into me. The pull of him, the sharp edges of love and fear tangled so tightly they were the same thing. He'd left because he thought it was the only way to save me, but he'd only taught me how deep the wanting could go. How it could live in the bones and breath long after the body was gone. I opened my eyes to the darkening sky. The stars were beginning to blink awake, pale and small against the deepening blue. I stood, brushing the dust from my hands, and turned toward home. The night felt hollow without him, but it also felt like a promise. Wyman Shaw wasn't finished with me yet, and I wasn't finished with him.
Please make sure you are subscribed and be one of the strange.